in using marijuana to try and treat other medical conditions, and the British drug maker is testing CBD treatments for disorders, including schizophrenia. Lillian Wu, Fox News.
An immigration attorney and policy analyst does not believe the Democrats are going to be willing to pass any immigration legislation during the 2018 election cycle. More from Chad Groening.
Last week, House Speaker Paul Ryan canceled votes on his immigration compromise bill because it faced certain defeat, and the vote on his so-called moderate bill was postponed after the bill sponsored by Congressman Bob Goodlatte that contained more robust border enforcement was defeated by a 231 to 193 vote. President Trump told lawmakers to, quote, stop wasting their time on immigration legislation until after the November midterm elections. Art Arthur is a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. He says that's what the Democrats want.
I don't anticipate that there will be any Democratic votes for that particular bill. I think they simply want to use the DACA population as a talking point in the next election, and they don't really care about resolving the issue for those individuals who are currently covered by DACA.
But Arthur does not think the American people are going to be fooled by the Democrats' strategy.
I think that the Democrats may be encouraged to overplay their hand by the mass media support that they've received with respect to the issue of parents and children.
And Trump tweeted Friday that voters need to elect more Republicans. He called Democrats obstructionists and accused them of not caring about border security. I'm Chad Groening.
And American consumers lost a bit of their optimism in June. The Conference Board says its Consumer Confidence Index slipped this month to 126.4. For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible, it says the heart of the fool inclines to the left, just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
I have not called for the harm of anybody. This president has lied again. And so our members of the Democratic caucus are talking about civility, and that makes good sense. But protest is civility. Protest is about peaceful resistance to the kind of actions that we're experiencing from this president. This president will try to do everything to divert our attention. He calls me names, he calls everybody names. As a matter of fact, we expect that from him. I've said nothing like that.
Right.
I've talked about peaceful protest.
Right. Oh, really? It's okay? If part of peaceful protest is stopping Stephen Miller from going to a restaurant, Nielsen family from eating at a restaurant, stopping Pam Bondi from going to a movie, Sarah Huckabee Sanders from having dinner with her family, I'm not okay with that. And it shouldn't be okay if Republicans did it to Democrats. I just think people are allowed to do their job. People can have an opinion, but you're also allowed to live your life, or else nobody's going to be serving in government. And by the way, I'm worried about the safety of everybody serving publicly.
It dramatically increases the chance of violence. And you know what the conversation is now amongst our lawmakers? If someone does this to you, how are you going to handle yourself? Don't react. Don't throw a punch. That conversation shouldn't be had. And we saw those happening. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, all that happened. And then Maxine Waters has that presser in L.A. and says, continue it.
Wow. Welcome to the show. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. It's great to be with you. We have two great guests for you today. RNC spokesperson, national spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany, and Dr. Kenneth Barnes are going to join the program. Dr. Barnes is an author and chair at the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and the author of Redeeming Capitalism. He'll be on with us in hour 2. Excuse me. And we will be having a ton of great information for you today, to include some details on the continuing saga with Maxine Waters. And I feel the need to kind of clarify, and I'm going to, why I feel like her statements are so dangerous and why there's been so much of a backlash against them, so much so that she was on TV crying. And there's no doubt in my mind she's taking this seriously because she's heard from Democratic leadership and they're publicly denouncing her statements. So we're going to get into that. We also have a bit of a discussion about the media at large kind of saying they want civility while using the worst kinds of language against their opponents and the supporters of their opponents. And then a bit of schadenfreude, if you will. We Christians aren't supposed to engage in that, but we definitely have a story that describes what has happened to a staffer who yelled an expletive at President Trump on Capitol Hill, who's been suspended. So we'll talk about that. First, let's listen to MSNBC talking about the harassment of Trump officials as a tool to avoid genocide.
Is all of this fair game in your opinion? Is all of this fair game in your opinion?
Absolutely. This is a time for moral and ethical courage. It's not time for courtesies. And what this administration's doing, along with its surrogates, who so boldly lie every day, whether it's the press secretary or the Secretary of Homeland Security, demands some public response that's appropriate. And my understanding was she was asked not to serve. Not to be served, and she left quietly. So I'm all in favor of that, because let's not forget what happened in Germany when people were silent, Cambodia, Rwanda, and now Myanmar with the Rohingyas.
Too many people are being silently complacent. Sir Michael Singleton, Peter Emerson, I want to thank you for joining us.
Gigi, thanks so much.
So at what point did enforcing our immigration laws in the same way that they were enforced under previous presidents become similar to the genocide of Myanmar or Rwanda, or the silent acceptance and complicity of Germans during the rise of Nazism? Do you see how starkly different those things are? Nazism, which ended up killing not just Jewish people, but people, really anyone who wasn't an Anglo-German, who couldn't prove their German ancestry, they were simply carted off in wagons and gassed. Some of them were experimented on. Their skin was used to make shoes and lampshades and things like that. It's the worst of the worst. I mean, and there's so many instances in human history where the depravity of man is on full display. And these nincompoops, these people who are incapable of stringing together coherent thoughts, are actually comparing border enforcement, where people who come from backward third world countries are housed in beautiful, air-conditioned, with beds and bathroom facilities, and the children are taken care of, and even the parents are living in relative luxury in comparison to the poverty that they've escaped. They've broken our law by entering the country illegally, and we're literally putting them up in situations that we Americans wouldn't want to be imprisoned under border enforcement. But if you're coming from a third world place like these people are coming from, living in air-conditioned, it's safety, air-conditioned safety with 3 meals a day, access to computers and iPads, etc., and, shower facilities and bathrooms. I'm sorry, if you don't want to be housed in these facilities, then do not approach the border illegally. You want due process. A part of that is you awaiting that due process in prison. A luxury prison by any, stretch of the imagination, but still, that's what it is. And so we hear them, again, you're conflating one horribly genocidal, horrifying, just almost, it's hard for us to even fathom sitting around, going to work and doing the things that we're doing while people are being carted off in cattle cars and being experimented on and gassed. But no one's being killed. So the comparison is not just flawed, it's ridiculous. But it's that kind of language. When people think, wow, our government is behaving like Hitler, I really should do something about this. And it's only a couple more irrational thoughts from there to what we saw in the baseball mound. What we saw when a Bernie bro decided he was going to take some senators out because these Republicans, they want to push grannies off cliffs and, they're horrible to children and the weak and the elderly. They were told that, all of the Bernie bros were told that by Bernie Sanders. And this guy took it too far. So yeah, I found the audio clip on Mediaite, and the reason why Mediaite had it up is because they want to demonstrate that this is legitimate. Yelling people out of movie theaters is legitimate. Now, let's talk about this a little bit further because there's more to the story with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She didn't share it in the briefing room when she was talking about what happened over the weekend. And everyone's victim blaming. Well, she used her work account to tweet out the story so she could bring all kinds of cane down on the lady who threw her out of the restaurant. Actually, she was responding to multiple media requests for comment. And she responded from her official account because she is the press secretary of the United States, and that's what happened to her. And it happened to her was work-related. Victim blaming doesn't work for anyone. No one who's seen this story believes she did anything wrong because she was simply sitting down waiting to be served, and they had a cheese board in front of them. It's not like she's not immediately identifiable. If the servers didn't want to serve them, they could have said as soon as they sat down and they had their menus and they took their drink orders, when they brought the drinks back, instead of bringing drinks back, they could have said, we can't serve your party. And of course, it would have still had the same reaction, but they give them the cheese board. They let them order a bunch of appetizers and get their drinks and then decide that everyone can stay except Sarah Sanders. She needs to get up and leave. And that's supposed to be okay with Americans? There's a huge divide in this country. It's partisan, it's ugly, it's rancorous, but it doesn't involve your private time. And for people who can no longer differentiate between legitimate protest time and people being at home with their families, you don't protest at people's houses. You protest at their place of work. You protest at the government building where they work. You protest at the corporate building where the item that you disagree with is occurring. You don't protest at a person's home. The reason why you don't do that is because they have families and you don't want someone protesting at your home. But the people who are doing this don't seem to have the ability to flip it on the other side and say, would I want this to happen to me? Would I want someone to show up outside my home and start blaring sirens and, sounds of whatever they think will make me feel terrible? Obviously, there are other concerns as well. See, they're lucking out because most of these people who work for the Trump administration, who they're protesting at their house, they live in these semi-public areas. They live in townhomes and apartments where it's private property, but it's kind of in the public domain. There are people who live on private streets, meaning the street that they live on is owned by the people who live on it, which means the minute you step onto it and you're not invited, you're not a guest, you're trespassing. And then lots of different rules apply, and they're not in your favor. So the idea that these people are being validated and spurred on and encouraged by Maxine Waters, who is now, she's not really walking the comments back, but she's trying to make all of us aware that no one's really upset with what she said. They just want to clarify, which I don't think is accurate. Then we have, these are additional considerations, additional factors. So we've got this basically MSNBC panel of guests. They're saying that harassment of Trump officials is a tool to avoid genocide, which is completely ridiculous. It's an utter lie. It's a falsity. It's on its face, completely and utterly not true. And they go on to continue what I've now termed shame-splaining. So let's add that to the lexicon of the Stacey on the Right show. Moving on. We got scratch a scandal, find a Democrat. And now we have shame-splaining. It's number 6.
There is a real conversation here about civility, right? And our ability to be in the same spaces at the same time with people who we do not agree with. And the Sarah Sanders example is one of those where was that the right way for the owner of that restaurant to handle the situation of Sarah Sanders eating in that restaurant? Well, it's definitely not going to further the conversation in between Republicans and Democrats for her to do that. However, the counter is, was Sarah Sanders using her White House account, her @press secretary Twitter account, to basically rally the anger against this restaurant in Virginia? Was that a proper use of her function and her title and her job as well? Neither of those things gets us any closer to being people who can actually talk about issues in the same room together. But it does really point to kind of where we are, which is it's an example of how divided we actually are. And it's scary that we're that divided.
The other piece of this is that it doesn't frighten the White House or Republicans to have these protesters show up. In fact, there's some evidence that part of the reason Donald Trump was able to turn the primaries significantly against Ted Cruz when he was because some of these protests against Trump happened, and Republican voters said, we want to support whoever is getting protested. So especially on the right, especially among the president's base, these kind of protests result in sort of a conservative backlash that the White House likely believes could be politically useful to them.
Okay, a couple things. Four things. Okay, so first of all, it's not that any old Republican voter sees someone getting protested and automatically supports that person. Republicans didn't automatically support Roseanne Barr when everyone was angry at her about her tweet that went out. In fact, it was roughly divided into like thirds. People who just didn't care, people who thought she had the right to tweet whatever she wanted, she was off work, and people who thought the comment was offensive and refused to defend it. It is absolutely the most basic kind of underlying insult that woman just leveled at everyone who supports anybody but a Democrat, that we don't need policy or any kind of reason to support someone. No one looked and said, I like that better than, say, this one or that one. No, everyone was just like, he gets the most protests, so we're supporting him. He's the one that the left hates the most, so we like him the most. There are people who engage in that kind of knee-jerk reactionary decision-making, but the most of the masses, 64 million people who came out to vote for someone besides Hillary Clinton, there are at least 10 reasons I could rattle off right now, and none of them are Donald Trump got the most protests. The Antifa movement went out, and part of them were directed from the Hillary Clinton campaign. You guys remember when this story broke? And these people were out there to rough people up and make it look like the Trump supporters were racist by beating up on people of color at Trump rallies. So it wasn't even Trump supporters who were mixing it up and getting into these huge dust-ups at the rallies. So how can we believe anything that they say? So just a couple more things. Really? Sarah Huckabee Sanders is just as wrong as the lady who threw her out of the restaurant, and that's why we can't have a civil conversation? I don't think so. They followed her. The owner of the restaurant followed her to the next restaurant. Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her husband drove home, and her extended family, most of which are liberals from her husband's side of the family, were eating at the restaurant across the street, and they were getting protested there. And one of the family members came out and said, we're libs just like you, and you're embarrassing us. We don't work for the president. Isn't that something? Maybe that's part of why you see people supporting the president instead of the media on this thing. I don't know. We can make up our own minds, can't we? We'll be back with more after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for a health care plan, or more importantly, if you signed up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have hundreds of thousands of members all across the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2.5 billion of each other's medical bills. Best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is about $500 a month. Your savings may be less or more, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. Here's the number to find out more. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. Just hit *345. That's *345. *345.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a Legacy Moment. I have a friend who was greatly wronged by a man he respected and trusted. He felt used and manipulated. Soon bitterness took residence in his heart. The more he thought about what this man had done to him, the more he despised him. In fact, he struggled with hatred toward him, and it became apparent to all around him. You know, associating with people means we run the risk of being offended. God's going to hold that person responsible for what they do, but he also holds us responsible for our reaction. We're never free to repay evil for evil. To hate or despise someone is to commit murder in our hearts. In fact, that's one of the things that God says he hates in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 and 17. The text says, there are 6 things which the Lord hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood. There's a broader principle here. God hates hands that shed innocent blood. I doubt that there are too many of us that are going out there trying to shed someone's blood. But perhaps we have done that in our hearts. Perhaps our attitude toward the mistreatment and manipulation we've experienced has driven us to think things that are not right and to harbor hatred in our hearts and mind. Or we might be the individual who intentionally is going out to use someone, to deceive someone, to manipulate them. God hates mistreatment of the innocent. Furthermore, hatred is a form of murder. We don't want to go there. Sometime you may want to read Matthew chapter 5, verse 22. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Cry out to God to help you forgive and love those who have hurt you. Don't abuse, mistreat, or manipulate people.
Join Crawford Loritz tomorrow for another Legacy Moment.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. I'm really incensed by the refusal of many people on the left to simply say that what Maxine Waters is calling for, the public vilification of people for where they work, that's wrong. I mean, people who don't agree with abortion don't run people who support abortion out of public spaces. There are plenty of things that are much more repulsive than this current issue that we engage in on a regular basis in this country that we don't run people out of public spaces for. So the idea that we're going to somehow now suddenly see this as a legitimate resistance movement, a way of pushing back against the Trump administration, attacking people in gas stations and parking lots, verbally assaulting them in groups, accosting people, chasing them down the street as was done to Pam Biondi, not just her, but people who were with her, that's going to be accepted. I can see why someone who I find him repugnant for his political beliefs, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, someone that I disagree with very strongly, even the two of them had to stop a moment and say, wait, this is something we cannot accept. Because if it's good for Trump supporters, at some point it will be good for people who are on the left. Anyone can be accosted by a group and run out of a public place. That's not what we do in America. It's not legitimate protest, and it can never be defended. So when I hear people defending it, it incenses me, and I have to speak out about it. And I feel that speaking out is the most legitimate form, besides going into the voter booth, speaking out, much, much better than seeing someone pumping gas and deciding they shouldn't be able to pump gas. That's not acceptable. That's actually infringing on their right to move freely about the country. And I don't see it going anyplace good. So right now, it's my pleasure to welcome frequent guest of the show, RNC National Spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, I'm so excited about this. This is vindication for all of us who felt the president was exercising his duly and, properly given authority by Congress to control immigration in this country. And it was no problem when it was Donald Trump. And now when it was President Obama, it was no problem. Now that it's President Trump, it's a huge problem for him to exercise that authority. And the Supreme Court has ruled in his favor on what a lot of people have come to know as the Muslim ban, which is not exactly accurate, but you know what I mean. Oh, no. Have we lost you?
Hey, Stacy, I can hear you now. You cut out
okay.
there for a second.
I was about to say, no. We have heavy rain here in Missouri. I don't know what's going on down in Tupelo, but we're going to have to work with these different connections. So talk to us about the majority opinion that validates the president's right to control immigration.
That's right. We knew that this was in his purview and his power and his constitutional authority to do this. Nevertheless, there was an apoplectic sort of outrage from the mainstream media. I recall this because I was at CNN when the ban was announced, or the travel pause is what I call it, and they were just outraged that the president was exercising his constitutional power to protect this country. We always knew that the Supreme Court would uphold this despite federal judges, liberal federal judges, not allowing it to move forward. So today was a big validation innovation, big victory for this White House and for the American people. And for the people who are calling this a so-called Muslim ban, it's nothing of the sort. In fact, it only affects 6 of the 49 Muslim-majority countries. That's a very small number, obviously. So those other 43 Muslim-majority countries are not affected by this. There's no mention of faith in the travel pause. It is targeted at countries that do not have the adequate systems to check the individuals coming to this country. So this was in the president's authority. He was right to do this, and today was vindication of that.
So in the interim, because I remember covering this, every time he would adjust the travel pause or adjust the countries that were on it to try to make sure that people understood, look, this is a safety mechanism. It's temporary. We're just trying to get our things together. Some liberal, Ninth Circuit or some circuit judge would invalidate the ban or put a stay on it. And they would say, yeah, you can't pause it. You have to continue to allow these people in. So these people continue to pour into the country. Well, now does the ban actually go into effect, or what happens, because it's been so convoluted?
Yeah, it does go into effect. And basically there was a temporary restraining order put on the travel pause by a federal judge that was overturned, and that was overturned before today. So yes, this will be in full effect, and it's a pause from countries that are essentially hotbeds for terrorism and don't have a system by which you can check and make sure the people coming here are safe to come here. And I want to quote for you quickly 2 Obama intelligence community heads. One is James Clapper, who said ISIS is taking advantage of the torrent of migrants to insert operatives into that flow, echoed by Jim Comey, who said, I cannot offer assurances that there's no risk associated with the Obama refugee program. These are Obama intel officials warning about terrorists posing as refugees to gain access to this country. And President Trump reacted to that by putting in place this travel pause until we figure out what's going on. No one wants the kind of horrific attacks we saw at Pulse nightclub and elsewhere. We have to protect this country, and this president, and putting this order into place and now no longer being blocked by a court, is doing just that.
So are there any other, because I also felt like rogue judges around the country, Obama appointees, et cetera, who were really more interested in making political statements than doing their jobs, were taking turns, kind of putting stays on any iteration of this. So this is the actual official travel pause, the final travel pause that was issued. Are there any more intervening court cases or any other announcements that we have to look forward to in the next session of SCOTUS or anything like that pertaining to the pause?
Not pertaining to the pause at the moment. I mean, I certainly do not put it past folks on the left to try to come up with some new novel argument against it, but it seems like all of those have been worn out and tired, and this was the final validation of it. So, no, I don't anticipate any more judicial decision-making on this, and the president can move forward and protect American citizens. But, I would just pause to note how scary it is that a liberal federal court judge, I think out of Alaska it was, or perhaps it was Hawaii, could pause the program of a president to keep this country safe, could say, no, with the stroke of a pen, I'm going to restrain the ability of the president to restrict travel from countries where it's necessary. That's a real national security danger when you have liberal judges politicizing what should be a process about national security and protecting United States citizens. So it's kind of troubling that lower court judges can do this. And I think we all need to keep our eye out for it, because it's happening more often than we'd like, where these judges become essentially legislators or executives and rebuking the president.
Well, that brings me to a topic we've touched on many, many times, which is the November midterms and how important it is for people to turn out, because the part of the president's agenda is filling vacant court seats, court appointments, and that is his purview as the president, and he needs more time to get that done because of how slow the Democrats have walked through his nominees and really gummed up the process of him filling these vacancies.
No doubt. I mean, I think this is one of the most misunderstood elements of what a president does and how important it is, and that's judicial placement. I mean, for any of your listeners who care about pro-life values, who care about religious freedom, exercising your religion free from restraint by government, the travel pause, making sure that the president can exercise his power to protect this nation, all of that is either safeguarded or stopped by the men and women in our federal judiciary. So it is so important to place those judges, get them confirmed, get them through the Senate. And if we could get a few more Republican senators, we could stop some of this backlog and really place in the judiciary men and women of integrity who respect the Constitution and who for a lifetime can engage in conservative judicial thought and protect the values we all hold dear.
So well put. I encourage people to think that through. And the other thing that really is, to me, interesting about them siding with the president, because I kind of felt like they would, but, what do I know? There have been plenty of times where SCOTUS has come down. I'm like, what's this? And it's precedent. They have reasoning behind it. They're able to do it. But in this case, I felt like it was a clear and obvious win coming down the pipeline for the president. Now that he has this under his belt, where do you see him going with the problem with the immigration issue? And it's not really an immigration issue. It's an issue of our courts being backlogged from 8 years of inaction and ineptitude by the Obama administration at our southern border. And now we have 600, 700,000 people in that backlog living in the country. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. And then we have the influx at the border now where Democrats have made this a public relations nightmare that children can't be separated from people who we don't know if they're their parents. How does the president work through that in the intervening moments between now and when the campaign season really kicks off?
Yeah, this is tough because we really need congressional action on a number of fronts with regard to immigration. We, of course, need it to allocate the funding to build the wall, to solve so many of our problems. This child-parent separation, none of us want to see that happen. Not even, not the president, not me, not any Republican wants to see that happen. But ultimately, it's in the hands of Congress to allow the president to, one, enforce the law, and two, keep families together. And the way you do that, Congress, is by passing legislation that rolls back part of something called the TVPRA, which does not allow us to engage in expedited removal for certain classes of illegal immigrants. If you permit us to remove families together, to do so expeditiously, to do so speedy, and definitely in consultation with the Constitution and due process. If you allow all that to happen, Congress, then we can enforce immigration law and do so in a compassionate way. But the ball is in Congress's court, and unfortunately, we don't have Democrats willing to work with us. So, the president's kind of, between a rock and a hard place and having to enforce immigration law without the help and assistance of Congress. So that's why these midterm elections are so important. We need more Republicans.
You're okay. So dead on. Absolutely. So what I'm hoping to see at this point is, cause the fever pitch and emotional rhetoric that we're seeing right now, the really kind of crazy talk that's been going on has just begun to fizzle out with Maxine Waters saying, you got to harass these people in their public spaces. And Schumer and Pelosi have now come out and said, actually, no, we're not going to do that. So now that things will begin to calm down, hopefully no violence. We'll just move on from here to solutions. Do you see the Democrats even softening a tad, or are they going to ride this dead horse into the midterm?
Well, I don't see them softening because that hardened leftist element of the party has really, unfortunately, become the face of the party. You have Nancy Pelosi, who represents the old, tired establishment that the party doesn't like, and certainly the nation's not a big fan of hers. And then you have the Maxine Waters, which represent the far left element of the party, making calls for violent action and altercation. And, you've heard Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi come out and denounce her, but where are the others? Where are the whole slew of Democrats coming out and saying, we stand against this, we stand on the side of peace? You're just not hearing it. Because unfortunately, the president was right when he said she has become the face of the party. So, we at the Republican Party, Maxine Waters, please go out and keep talking, because you keep making statements that drive voters closer to the Republican Party, because they like our values, they prize our values, and they certainly don't stand with violent altercation, which it seems like Maxine Waters was advocating for.
It does. And I know she said that she wasn't, but the quotes are out there. YouTube's forever. And so last question. I know your time is valuable. And for anybody just tuning in, we're speaking with RNC National Spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany, frequent guest of the program, an expert. And my last question for you is really, so I guess what's it going to take? Like, we saw beautiful people. They just happen to be Republicans. That's not why they're beautiful. They're beautiful because they were innocent people on that baseball mound about a year ago. and Stephen Scalise and others were gunned down by a crazy Bernie bro who felt incited by things that Bernie Sanders had said. And then after that, everyone calmed down because it was clear that people had gone too far. Before that, it was the 5 officers gunned down by sniper fire when Black Lives Matter was protesting. And the rhetoric was crazy and there was a lot of violence. And then when that happened, people calmed down. Is that what it's going to take for people to calm down and realize that their rhetoric is absolutely unacceptable here?
I hope not. I hope not, because none of us want to see that kind of violence. I think, and Maxine Waters, heart of hearts, I'm sure she does not want to see that happen. But, there are repercussions to words. And when you say things like, take out the president tonight, which is one of the things she said, I want to take out the president tonight. There are lunatics out there who hear that and see that as a license to act. And that is not something any of us should want to happen. We have to be careful with our words. We cannot go out and make calls like this that can be interpreted one way. Even if she says that's not how she intended it, it can be perceived that way by a lunatic. So we all need to be careful and get back to that place where we can have a discussion with a member of the other party and be friends, because I have a lot of Democratic friends. I might not agree with them on a lot, but we're friends at the end of the day. And I think we've got to try to get back to that place where we can all break bread together.
I couldn't agree more. Kayleigh McEnany, RNC National Spokesperson, thank you so much for your time today. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Stacey. Appreciate it.
All right. We have now just a couple seconds left in this segment, and we always appreciate when Kayleigh has time to come and speak with us. She's frequently on Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, and so she's very, very busy. So it's always great when we're able to get her to come on, especially to talk about this ruling, which of course, I was praying, but I was also feeling like, just based on what I'd read, that the president was going to eventually win on this. But the problem is that they were able to create a narrative, people on the left, people in the media, that the ban was motivated by some kind of racial animus that the president has against Muslims. They don't pay attention to the fact that the president actually has a diversity. It's the NDC, National Diversity Council for the Trump campaign and Trump administration. And it's nothing but Black, Hispanic, Asian, and people from the Middle East, different areas of the Middle East. So multiple individuals from the Middle East. And they're on this council and they advise him on matters that are important. And they see no problem with doing that. So it's clear that they've met with him and they don't find him to be a racist. But still, we have millions of Americans who think he is. So I'm glad to see the Supreme Court rule this way. And I'm glad to see the president be able to implement another arm of his strategy to protect Americans. When we get back, we'll have more for you here on Stacey on the Right.
This is Uncommon Moments. Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
In the mid-1990s, I started doubting that I'd ever get a head coaching position. Minnesota Vikings chaplain Tom Lamphere counseled me just to keep my eyes on Christ and be the best assistant coach I could. He told me to follow the Lord's guidance.
As Tony went into the 1995 season, he tried not to focus on his disappointment over 2 head coaching opportunities he didn't get. Instead, he got back to work with the goal of helping his team get to the Super Bowl.
Letdowns like these are why God gives us good wives. I needed Lauren to tell me that she loved me and believed in me, no matter what. Try to encourage your spouse today.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. urbanfamilytalk.com.
We need you to call your senators today. Tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference. Call the Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Again, call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood.
This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. Did you know that the Centers for Disease Control did a study on defensive gun use by Americans? Probably not, because the report destroys gun control talking points. A Florida State University criminologist didn't know either and did his own analysis, which showed that Americans use guns to successfully defend themselves against attackers over 2.2 million times a year. This number is based upon an unweighted nationally representative sample of over 12,000 individuals. Data from the CDC confirms this result. In fact, CDC data proves Americans used firearms to defend themselves 3.6 times more often than perpetrators utilize firearms to attack them. This information was kept private by the CDC because it doesn't support the gun grabbers' mantra that all guns are bad. Instead of hiding data, let's spread the truth far and wide. Lawful gun owners use weapons to defend themselves and others millions of times every year. Sounds like gun control to me. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
Welcome back to Stacey on the Right.
If you vote for Trump, then you, the voter, you, not Donald Trump, are standing at the border like Nazis going, you here, you here. And I think we now have to flip it, and it's a given the evilness of Donald Trump.
If you hold down the woman while the rapist is raping her, and you didn't rape her, are you a rapist?
Tens of millions of people voted for him after he showed his cards for years.
But are you, are you suggesting that they're racist, or they're
yes?
The people who vote, all the people who voted for Donald Trump are racist?
Yes.
If Republicans weren't so racist, they could encourage black people who are morally conservative to be on their side.
Those people who are supporting what he's doing here are racist, period.
It's movements and people that are speaking up for things, whether we're talking about civil rights movement, whatever else, those movements should be nonviolent, but they should not be non-confrontational.
And so these policies that this administration is putting forth are intentionally cruel, they are racist, and it is our job as citizens to speak out against that. Now, does that mean that we're going to be violent? No. But does that mean that Sarah Sanders can have a nice, quiet dinner with her family when she's taking our tax dollars to implement this policy? I don't think so.
Anybody who votes for and supports a racist is a racist. You are culpable, white America. I'm sorry.
Is it complicit, or either you're enabling?
Wow. So who was that? It was a montage of individuals on the liberal networks saying things that sound like they're validating a desire to take your protest or your disagreement a step further, a step beyond simply being upset. It's okay because these people are like Nazis. They're like the people who hold someone down while they're raped. Do you feel like that as someone who's voted for Donald Trump, or maybe you didn't vote for Donald Trump, but do you feel like that for supporting abortion? Do you feel like that for advocating for sanctuary cities, which increase the crime and the probability that black children and families will be killed? Do you feel like you're complicit in rape and murder and genocide? You probably don't. And that's because, you know, like it or not, that's not the way we do political discourse in this country. I may loathe your support of abortion, but it doesn't give me the right to run you out of a restaurant or a movie theater or to harass you while you're pumping gas. And I know that it's almost a crazy pants type of a world, upside down, bizarro world we're living in, where that has to be explained. But here we are. We have to make that delineation. We cannot simply, just leave it to rational thought for other people to assume. These networks have millions of viewers. Millions of people a week tune into these broadcasts and hear these kinds of incendiary comments. The same people who said no hate with an 8 in it the same people who said war on women, the same people who started Me Too, the same people who have started all of these different movements that are supposed to bring civility and respect and tolerance for everyone. Remember my airplane tolerance problem? I got a problem with that term, but that's their baby. They're the same ones saying that, well, if you support the president, then you're supporting, it's Hitler. You're supporting something that is untenable. So what I'm looking for is for people to, you have to unplug your emotions and you have to say, this is wrong. I'm not going to participate in this. And if you think they were done, they're not. There's a little bit more. It's this media turning Trump voters into public enemy number one. Let's listen to number 4.
But you guys were involved with being patriotic, right?
Very, very patriotic, but not...
Being patriotic was the group that contacted and helped organize some of these activities that you posted on your own Facebook account.
Those were legitimate.
Those were Russians.
They were not Russians. I don't go with the Russians.
Laid out very clearly what his interests are.
Kristen Welker, how do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
And 25% of the country, whether it's 25, 20, 30%, are hardcore racists. They do not want to see brown people coming into America. That's just what's going on here. I mean, of certain individuals and institutions, we will, as per Chief Jim Hopper, punch some people in the face when they seek to destroy the meat and the disenfranchised and the marginalized. And we will do it all with soul, with heart, and with...
There are still generations of people, older people, who were born and bred and marinated in that prejudice and racism, and they just have to die.
A lot of his supporters believe that we are the enemy of the American people, and that is really, really an awful situation. We are not the enemy of the American people. We love the American people.
At the end, you hear Wolf Blitzer saying, people think we're the enemy of the American people. We're the enemy of half of the American people. The half who voted for Donald Trump, 40% of the Trump supporters are racist at minimum. But really, it's all of them. They just all need to die. They marinated in that racist belief system, and now they need to die. Oprah Winfrey, someone who used to talk about on her show how she read a proverb a day and how she would move through the Proverbs. Every month she read the book of Proverbs and the book of Psalms. She'd read a few Psalms a day and one proverb, and she would get all the way through. This is a woman who used to actually refer to the Bible as the inerrant word of God and someplace that we could look to get wisdom and understandings. And there she is talking about, people who she deems to be racist, and they're old and they've marinated in those beliefs and they just need to die. I mean, who is she to decide who gets to live and who gets to die? It's this kind of crazy, it's just, she's queen of the world. And the rest of us we're just accidentally getting a chance to live in this joint, I guess. I mean, completely discounting all of the minority individuals in this country who have voted for Donald Trump, who support Donald Trump. It's legion. I mean, look online at the number of people who support Donald Trump who are of color and also millennials. I'm always surprised by the new people that come into my Twitter feed or my Facebook feed, and especially on YouTube. Oh my goodness, the YouTubers that are black and conservative. It's a pretty astounding group. And so you look at that and you think about what they're saying there. They're validating hatred and dissension. And we cannot allow that to stand. We have to stand up against that and push back on it. And notice how they all sound kind of similar. Like the one you heard where he's, we got to punch him in the face. He's actually an actor on Broadway. He was accepting an award and he made that statement. It's just crazy pants. And I'm sorry, I find it to be crazy that everyone is so offended. The same people who are saying these things are the same ones who are totally offended when Donald Trump said, get that guy out of here. He was a protest guy. He was mixing it up in the crowd. He'd punched a black Trump supporter in the face, and the security people were removing him, and Donald Trump said, get him out of here. Get him out of here. Can't believe that low-life loser is in here. And they were upset because Donald Trump called him a low-life loser. They weren't upset that the guy was punching black people at a Trump event. Perhaps because they felt like, what good could they get out of that in the news media? So There were other Supreme Court victories today, and I want to get to another one that I felt like was just so important. And we had a guest on about this a few months ago to talk about this California law that forces anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers, and that's a misnomer in and of itself. I'm on the apnews.com website, totally liberal. Instead of saying pro-life, it's anti-abortion. I'm fine with it. Call me anti-abortion. I am anti-abortion, but they should be calling these pregnancy centers pro-life that provide information about abortion. So the SCOTUS said you can't force pregnancy resource centers to tell people about abortions. The 5-4 ruling also cast doubt on similar laws in Hawaii and Illinois. So far left is just having a not so good day today. The California law took effect in 2016, requiring centers that are licensed by the state to tell clients about the availability of contraception, abortion, and prenatal care at little or no cost. Centers that are unlicensed were required to post a sign that said so. The court struck down that portion of the law. The centers that were, so you got this pregnancy resource center. Usually a woman at a pregnancy resource center has already been to Planned Parenthood. Oftentimes they already have their abortion scheduled. How do I know this? Because we have a number of pregnancy resource centers in the metro area here in St. Louis, and I've been to them. I've talked to the people who work there. I know the leadership at these centers, and I've been to their events where they talk about how many of the women that came in who decided ultimately to go through with their pregnancy and have a baby, how many of them were first at the Planned Parenthood? How many of them walked across the street from the Planned Parenthood office, the abortuary, to the medical van where they received the actual testing that they needed and referrals, and then met up later with the counselor at the Pregnancy Resource Center and were given diapers and all kinds of prenatal care, and then postnatal care, and then care for the baby. They also do parenting classes. So there's all of this. It's not just a, hey, don't have a baby, don't have an abortion. You got to have this baby. Now get out there and make a way for yourself. It's help with rent. Pregnancy resource centers will pay the rent of the girls who come in and they've been thrown out of the house because they're pregnant. They'll find them somewhere to live. They will pay their rent. They'll help them outfit the apartment. They'll make sure they have the stuff they need for the baby, the minimum, the crib, car seat, booster seat, you know, all the stuff that you need to set up a baby. And it's expensive. There is no cheap way to, hey, I'm having a baby, I'm going to set everything up. There's no cheap way to do it. But the Pregnancy Resource Center gets you all of those things. You come in, you plug into them, and they're also providing you with medical care, real medical care with physicians and nurses licensed to practice in this state with admitting privileges so they can get you into the hospital if something goes wrong. This is the kind of care that pregnancy resource centers provide. They neither have the time nor the interest to tell people, hey, you know where you can get an abortion? Planned Parenthood. They don't need to tell these girls that. The girls already know that they can get an abortion. They're often coming straight from the Planned Parenthood. I interviewed a lady at a protest at Planned Parenthood who said she wanted to have an abortion so bad she went to the Planned Parenthood 3 times, and the people in the office were so rude that she stood outside crying, and she thought, what am I going to do? I don't know any other place I'm supposed to go, but these people just don't seem like they want to help me. And across the street was the big, huge, it's an RV that's been outfitted into a rolling medical center. She walked over, and they opened the doors, and she went in, and they gave her water. They gave her coffee. They talked to her about her options. They gave her the pregnancy test. She already knew she was pregnant, but they gave her a pregnancy test. They did an examination and told her how far along they thought she was, made an appointment with her, and started her on the road. And she was standing there talking to me about this with the baby that she was pregnant with. That baby was on her hip. Pregnancy Resource Center should not be forced to do this kind of stuff. And the Supreme Court agrees. Here's the statement. And it's, first of all, Justice Clarence Thomas, in his majority opinion, said the centers are likely to succeed in their constitutional challenge to the portion of the law involving the licensed centers, which means while the law is currently on the book, its challengers can go back to court to get an order halting its enforcement. An attorney for the challengers said Tuesday they expect to be able to do that quickly. California had not actually been enforcing the law because it was moving through the courts. California cannot co-opt the licensed facilities to deliver its message for it, Thomas wrote for himself. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Anthony Kennedy, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch were on the side of this ruling. He called the requirement for unlicensed centers unjustified and unduly burdensome. Of course, the others were predictably for the idea that the government can force you to tell people what other options are in your business. Can you imagine running a laser eye care center and the government tells you, yeah, we want you to tell people about how many different places they can get glasses. And you're like, well, they know they can get glasses. They're wearing glasses. When they come in, they're wearing glasses. They want to come in and get LASIK eye surgery. And the government says, yeah, we know, but you can't just give them LASIK eye surgery. You have to tell them about all the different eye care facilities that exist to give them eye exams and give them contact lenses and glasses. You have to do that. You have to post signs for it. You have to basically advertise for these businesses. LASIK eye care centers would be understandably perplexed by any ruling that would force them to do that. Yet they were not perplexed at all in California, Illinois, and Hawaii when they were forcing people to tell pregnant women, yeah, I know you're now here and you want our help to have this baby, but make sure you know that you could just abort the baby and go on about your business. And here's where you could do that. I can't even believe a court ruling was required for this. So you got that. You also have, obviously, what has been termed the pause, the immigration pause. And thanks to Kayleigh McEnany for coming on and giving us that additional terminology that we could use. And the Supreme Court actually reviewed all of the documents and the statements made by the president. And one of the justices actually issued a little bit of, they don't endorse the president's provocative statements that he made about Muslims coming into the country. We expressed no view on the soundness of the policy, according to Justice Roberts. And they cautioned him to make sure and use his office wisely in the statements that he issues. But his right to control immigration into this country is unquestioned and was just validated by the Supreme Court of the United States. What you gonna do, libs? My email box is full of stuff from progressive organizations saying they want to send guests to the show to talk about how horrible this is. Whatevs. We have hour 2 up next. Stay there.
American Family Coffee is coffee with a cause. Not only is it a delicious way to start your day, but it can also wake you up to the idea of supporting the American Family Association through a product you'd normally buy anyway. Choose from morning blend, evening blend, and everything in between. Get your American Family Coffee and support the American Family Association at afastore.net.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Steve Hughes. The president's travel ban is constitutional. John Decker reports from the White House. That's what the Supreme Court ruled today.
With the House planning to vote on an immigration bill tomorrow, the president's set to meet with lawmakers for lunch to discuss his legislative goals for the legislation. Meanwhile, agents with the Customs and Border Patrol have stopped the practice of turning over parents to prosecutors for charges of illegally entering the country. And federal prosecutors say they'll no longer bring criminal charges against parents entering the U.S. if they have their child with them. White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said that the administration's reversal was only temporary because the government is running out of resources. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Requirements forcing pro-life pregnancy centers to provide abortion information does not pass a Supreme Court review.
The Supreme Court says there are First Amendment problems with the California law requiring crisis pregnancy centers to provide information about where to obtain free or low-cost abortions. A 5-4 opinion authored by Justice Clarence Thomas says the requirements target speakers, not speech, and impose an unduly burdensome disclosure requirement. Writing for the liberal minority, Justice Stephen Breyer likened the California requirements with previously upheld laws requiring doctors to tell women seeking abortions about adoption services. In Washington, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
It's primary election day in several states.
In Utah, former presidential candidate and Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney is taking on State Representative Mike Kennedy for the seat of retiring Senator Orrin Hatch. Romney has the endorsement of President Trump.
I want to do everything in my power to help the people of Utah, and I believe I'm in the best position to do so.
Maryland Democratic Senator Ben Cardin is facing a challenge from Chelsea Manning. In New York, ex-convict Michael Grimm wants his old job back representing Staten Island in Congress. He's facing Dan Donovan, who has the backing of President Trump. Rachel Sutherland, Fox News.
Boy Scouts in 2 states are mourning the death of one teenager caused by a falling tree. Eben Brown reports.
A powerful storm could have been the reason why a tree weakened and fell at the Burt Adams Scout Camp north of Atlanta. The tree landed on the tent of a 14-year-old scout, killing him. The teen was visiting the camp from Texas, and other boys were inside that tent at the time, but escaped. They were all in their final week of their camping trip and were due to go home soon. The Boy Scouts often use soft-sided canvas tents similar to what U.S. troops used in World War II. Eben Brown, Fox News.
The absurdity of allowing transgender males to compete in women's high school sports became blatantly obvious at the recent track and field championships in Connecticut. Bob Kellogg explains.
For the second straight year, transgender males competing as females dominated the competition at the track meet. Steve McConkey of Four Winds Christian Athletics reports the biologically female competitors were obviously frustrated by the unfairness.
In high school, an athlete just has to go into office, no test, no biologically understanding of anything, and just say simply that they want to compete as a girl.
At least 60 upset parents are petitioning the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference to disallow transgender males to compete. McConkey encourages parents to speak up.
Don't be afraid. School authorities and people are going to say, well, the rights of these transgenders and they're bullied and all this, but you need to stand up and say what's wrong and just lovingly tell people the truth and don't cave in.
I'm Bob Kellogg.
And finally, a police dog in Spain shows that he can do more than sniff out drugs and catch bad guys. Carly Shimkus explains.
We've all seen dogs do some pretty incredible things, but this may be a first. The Madrid Police Department posting footage on Twitter that shows a trained canine named Pancho performing CPR on an officer. In the video, the officer pretends to fall to the ground. Then Pancho pounces on his chest and puts his ear to the officer's mouth to check for breathing. Pancho now seeing international praise and 22,000 likes on Twitter. Carly Shimkus, Fox News.
American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Abraham Hamilton III.
God put us in this world at this time to be salt and light. We don't fold because of the darkness that we're facing. This is not the first time in the world's history that it's gotten dark. God has called you and I to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment.
Tune in to the Hamilton Corner, weekdays at 5 p.m. Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
And gradually, I think both sides have now reached the point where they're so frustrated and so fed up and so impatient for change that this could lead almost anywhere. It is extraordinarily divisive. I cannot remember a time. The anti-war movement in Vietnam, the civil rights movement, in the 60s and early 70s, both of those were much more civil in tone. Even the anti-war movement was more civil in tone, but certainly the civil rights movement among the people who were protesting. Listen, I do think that the cultural issue is a fair point. That our culture has never been very Hollywood culture has been never very sympathetic, for example, to the pro-life movement. It's not very sympathetic to the Tea Party movement. And there are a lot of Americans who feel like they've been treated as second-class citizens. But I must tell you, we have never had a president who has lit the fire and put the country on boil more than this one. I think the culture has been here for a long time. What has dramatically changed is the nature of our leadership. And the incivility in Washington. Now, incivility preceded Donald Trump to Washington. It was there long before he got there. The polarization and all the breakdown of norms was there, but it's accelerated, it's deepened, and it's become much more poisonous. We're beginning to see threats to the way we live with each other. We're beginning to see threats to the whole idea we hold of democracy, that we may have our disagreements, but we basically have the same values.
Oh, man. So that was on CNN. I thought that was a really interesting comment that he made, that the incivility preceded Donald Trump. If you remember, it was President Obama who said, if they bring a knife to the gunfight, you bring a gun. If they bring a knife to the fight, you bring a gun. His wife said, if they go low, we go high. President Obama said, you gotta shame him and name him. You can't let a crisis go to waste. I mean, he was very clear in how he felt about his political opponents. And people would always say, well, he's just trying to illustrate a point. But when Donald Trump gets straight up and goes hardcore into the comments, then it's, well, he's practicing incivility. That dog won't hunt. You can't have it both ways. You're either fine with it or you're not. And if you're going to be fine with it, please just be fine with it. Don't make it more than it really is. So we've got a bunch of topics for you. Welcome to the show here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. We have Dr. Kenneth Barnes, chair at the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and author of Redeeming Capitalism. He's going to come on in the next segment. Right now, I want to talk about some breaking news story out of two pieces here. First off, out of Buffalo, New York, a Canadian national convicted of felony sexual assault is among the 40 illegal aliens taken into custody last week during a 4-day enforcement operation that ended on June 21st. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement actually targeted at-large criminal aliens, illegal re-entrants, immigration fugitives, and other violators. The operation targeted public safety threats such as convicted criminal aliens and gang members and individuals who have violated the immigration laws of the United States, including those who have re-entered. And this is a big problem for us. We have such lax enforcement that people feel they're just like, oh, yeah, you can throw me out. I'll just come back. These, of the 40 who were arrested, the arrest took place in central, western, and northern New York State. Almost 30% had criminal convictions or pending criminal charges. And among those arrested during the operation were a Mexican national with multiple criminal convictions for inflicting corporal injury on his spouse, 3 convictions for driving under the influence, 3 convictions for driving without a license, giving false information to a peace officer, and carrying a loaded firearm in a public space. A Salvadoran national with criminal convictions for theft, assault, and felony sexual assault, and other cases including individuals with convictions for serious offenses such as sexual assault, DUI, firearms possession, theft, neglect of a child, larceny, illegal reentry into the United States, contempt of court, and statutory rape. 7 of the individuals arrested during the enforcement action have been accepted for federal prosecution for reentry after deportation, a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Those who are not being criminally prosecuted will be processed for removal from the country, and individuals who have outstanding deportation orders or who have returned to the United States illegally after being deported are subject to immediate removal. Enforcement actions were conducted in accordance with routine daily target operations carried out by ICE fugitive operations teams, and they list off where the people were arrested, which counties in New York State. Now, the arrestees were 35 men and 5 women, and they were nationals from 13 countries: Brazil, Canada, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Jamaica, Malawi, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, Poland, Somalia, and Latvia. Now, we've had some discussion going on. It's been all over about the fact that a lot of judges are being told, that they're going to increase the number of judges at the border so they can try to handle the backlog. And I wonder why they don't do like a night court situation where they have the immigration courts open 24 hours a day. They stand up a bunch of courts down there and even maybe have a negotiation with the country of Mexico, because the due process begins when they land their feet in America. But if our deportation courts were on the border of Mexico, but actually located within the national sovereignty of Mexico, then those deportation orders would be immediate. It would be immediate turnarounds. Instead of asking the Mexicans to pay for the wall, we should ask for permission to have our courts on Mexican soil so that we can take care of these issues expeditiously. The chances of that happening are pretty slim because they are apparently just about to elect or have just elected some socialist who will probably be the worst president they've had in the modern era down in Mexico. And it's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump to make deals with this guy because he's completely antithetical to everything that the president stands for. So it's interesting to see that going on. Now, this next topic, gird your loins if you haven't been triggered today. If you're the kind who gets triggered, this is your moment. You're about to be triggered. You haven't heard about this story because the press is actually suppressing this part of what the Pope said recently. Now, full disclosure, I'm not Catholic. I do have quite a few friends who practice Catholicism, but I'm not Catholic. But I do follow the announcements made by the Pope, just like everyone else does. It's breaking news. And Pope Francis actually was being interviewed, speaking to an Italian family association. He had scripted remarks, and then he had some unscripted comments. And this happened on June 16th, which goes to show you what kind of, just it's a solid media blackout at this comment. So you got Pope Francis, and he's talking about, he talked about a couple of subjects. He started off by saying couples who screen for abnormalities in the womb are like using Nazi-type tactics to eliminate anyone who isn't perfect. And his quote is, "Last century, the whole world was scandalized by what the Nazis did to purify the race. Today, we do the same thing, but with white gloves." That comment received some media attention. The following media outlets covered the story: AP, ABC Online, NBC New York, CNN, Chicago Tribune, Hartford Courant, New York Times, Orlando Sentinel, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Portland Press Herald, South Florida Sun Sentinel, and the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. In the same spontaneous address, the Pope said only heterosexuals can form a family. Only heterosexuals can form a family. This is the quote. "It is painful to say this today. People speak of varied families, various kinds of family. The family, as man and woman in the image of God, is the only one." That's what he said. With the exception of CNN and the Wall Street Journal, not one of the media outlets that covered the Pope's remarks on abortion had a word to say about his comment. In fact, if it wasn't for the foreign sources led by the German media outlet Deutsche Presse Agentur, most of us would not know of this admission by Pope Francis. Now, the Media Research Center is actually concerned about this, but not just because of the media bias and their blackout of his comment. The reason they're concerned about it is because the news media appears to be manipulating public opinion in the run-up to the World Meeting of Families, which is an international conference. This Vatican event will take place in Ireland August 22nd through 26th, and gay activists are desperately trying to redefine the family to include homosexual couples. Pope Francis has just thrown a monkey wrench into their agenda, which is why the media intentionally decided to censor the remarks. I mean, I find it, you know, when we're talking about Nazi-esque tactics and all of that, and we're kind of tossing around these really, really, they're specific terms. You don't use Nazi-esque left-wing media to describe people who support someone you don't like unless they're actually carting people off in cattle cars, trying to take over the entire country, practicing totalitarianism and genocide, and murdering people who are not of a very specific ethnic background. It does not match. But this is Orwellian in its effectiveness. Most Americans do not know the Pope made that statement. Most Catholics do not know the Pope made that statement. So when you're talking about the Catholic faith, it's just like any other group of people. Christians in general have been found to soften and to moderate their stances on social issues when they're around people they know are easily triggered and emotionally driven and kind of violent in their opposition to things. I mean, who among us hasn't known that you're sitting with a group of people who are completely opposed to you politically, and you've simply chosen not to speak up on a topic because you just don't feel like getting into a big cat fight with a bunch of people? I've done both. I remember being at one of those bunco nights where you play the game bunco, and it was my first time getting invited to it, and I knew maybe 5 or 6 of the women there, and everybody else was someone that I was meeting for the first time. And a couple of them kind of knew that I was on school board before, but they weren't sure what I was doing afterwards. And when they realized that I was doing political commentary, they started bringing up things that I totally disagreed with. And at one point, I just let some comments fly by and I didn't say anything. And then they got to a subject where I was like, okay, geez. I mean, so I made a small comment and it turned into exactly what I thought. It was like a wrestling match, a verbal wrestling match. Well, I know this. Well, do you know that? Well, do you know, and all of that. And sometimes you just want a little bit of peace. But liberals know that. They know you just want a little bit of peace. So they want to best you in front of a bunch of different people because they're not really trying to change your mind. They're trying to change the minds of the observers. They want to co-opt other people into thinking the only reason she holds those beliefs is because she's bigoted. I don't care. She looks black to you, but she's not really, because real black people believe this. And that's one way of invalidating the opinions of someone who's black, who happens to be conservative. You use the fact that they're black against them. And so with this issue, with the Catholic Pope saying that the only family that is recognized in the Bible that is biblical is the traditional family of a man and a woman coming together to begin a family, whether they have children or not, that's the only family that would be recognized. It is a huge blow to all the strides that have been made around the world with gay marriage being the law of the land in so many westernized countries. Because if you call what you're doing with a same-sex couple a marriage, and everyone else is calling it a marriage because they're forced to because it's the law of the land, but the faith that you practice refuses to acknowledge it, you've got a serious problem. And unlike other denominations that tend to be really swayed by whatever the cause du jour is or the moment, this is their moment, the pride moment and all that stuff. Catholicism, well, they not only have their own head honcho, they have their own city. They have their own councils. They're completely autonomous. So if whole nations decide to flout Catholic doctrine, they still have the Vatican. They still have Vatican City. They still have their own army, and they still have the Pope. And so this is a difficult thing to overcome, and that's why the media is blacking it out. They're just like, you know what? We just want to acknowledge what he just said. We're not going to pay attention to that. We're not going to put it out there for other people to pay attention to it, because then people will begin to question the legitimacy of a Supreme Court ruling here in the United States. If your Catholic faith comes before man's laws, then you're going to hear that and you're going to think, oh, so it doesn't matter what people rule. Just like it didn't matter when the Supreme Court ruled that black people weren't people and white people couldn't marry them. Just like when the Supreme Court ruled that black people weren't people and they were property. Did that mean we weren't still people in the image of God? That God, he made all of us? No, it didn't. The Supreme Court can be wrong. The Pope made a statement that was really important to Catholics around the world, and the media should put it out there because he said it the same way they've said other things, shared other things that he said, because he put it out there, and it's within Catholic doctrine. It's amazing to see them black it out. When we get back, we're going to have Dr. Kenneth Barnes. Stay right there.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki Addison of Airing the Addisons on Urban Family Talk. Family is so important to everything. I mean, think about it. Right after God created Adam, he made family by creating Eve as his wife.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference this summer. We'll have a full slate of experts to help encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family.
Our speakers include Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, and more.
We'll even be there.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference will be Friday and Saturday, August 17th and 18th at Hope Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. Come help us fight back against the enemy's direct attack on marriage and family. That's the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference put on by Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Earlier this month, I talked about how many liberal progressives complained that Alan Dershowitz had changed. Actually, they are the ones who have changed. And in a recent op-ed, Dershowitz explains how the ACLU has abandoned its original mission. He should know since he served on the national board in the early years of his career. He writes that the director of the American Civil Liberties Union has now acknowledged what should have been obvious to everyone over the past several years. The ACLU is no longer a neutral defender of everyone's civil liberties. I'm not sure how neutral the ACLU has been in the past, but I'll concede the point to him. He says that they used a key test back in those days, which he called the shoe on the other foot test. In other words, would you vote the same way if the shoe were on the other foot? He concludes that now the ACLU wears only one shoe, and it is on the left foot. Its color is blue. The organization now seems only interested in taking cases and supporting policies that promote progressive ideas in the Democratic Party. Some of us can remember when the ACLU would occasionally take a very controversial high-profile case in which they would defend the rights of neo-Nazis or Klan members to march. An article in the New Yorker says the ACLU is getting involved in elections and reinventing itself for the Trump era. Not only is it getting involved in election campaigns, but it also plans to spend $25 million on races and ballot initiatives. This is quite a change for a group that used to be called nonpartisan. Frankly, the ACLU has been a left-leaning organization since its founding, but at least it tried to occasionally play both sides of the civil liberties question. That is no longer the case. It is now injecting itself and its ideologies in American politics. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Hey, welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here today. It's Tuesday. Super rainy here in Missouri. I know we need the rain, but it's like, really? But at least it's not super hot. Got to take the good with the bad, right? So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kenneth Barnes, chair at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, author of Redeeming Capitalism. Dr. Barnes, thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So I think this is one of the most important subjects that we can tackle, especially in this day and this time, the politically rancorous kind of language that permeates everything, where I remember when politics used to be something that you really only discussed it at certain times with certain people. And outside of those times, really, it was just business as usual. You just lived your life. And it has crept into everything. And so accordingly, some of the concepts that have been really integral to our country, where, you know, like capitalism, something that was seen as by all Americans as a universal good, has now come under attack as something that's bad, the source of inequality, something that's evil. And your book, Redeeming Capitalism, is you making the case for the fact that you find capitalism to be a biblical concept.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say I find it to be a biblical concept. What I say is that capitalism is a subject, not an object. Capitalism doesn't possess any hypostasis of its own, any traits of its own. It's not centrally organized. There is no single intelligence behind it. It's just a term we use to describe the cumulative effect of countless individual and corporate economic decisions. And if it's in a relatively lightly regulated environment, and if it's sufficiently monetized, you get capitalism. You get what we call capitalism. So the good news is that left to its own devices, it can be an exceptionally good creator of wealth. The bad news is it doesn't have a moral compass of its own. So therefore, you know, we shouldn't be uncritical of capitalism. We have to ask the question, what's good about capitalism, what's bad, and what's ugly. and we want to eliminate the ugly and overcome the bad and celebrate and expand the good. So my approach is, I think, a very fair and pragmatic approach. I'm a person who spent most of my life doing international business on a rather high level all over the world. So I appreciate all the good of capitalism. But, in the boardroom, sometimes I saw the not-so-good side. So I understand why people get upset. I understand the effects of the global financial crisis. But I tell people if we don't redeem it, we're going to hate what replaces it.
Well, and I like to point out that anytime you have human beings involved, you're going to see things that are innately good abused. And so we have to police ourselves. We have to police each other and police ourselves. So how does the Bible make the case for capitalism and liberty-oriented principles?
Well, again, it's not a question of the Bible making the case for it. What I say is that if we look at the history of capitalism, if we look at different epochs, we see that in the traditional capitalism observed by the likes of Adam Smith, it was undergirded by, if you will, an Enlightenment interpretation of traditional Judeo-Christian ethics. And it worked very well. It worked not only well for individuals, but it also worked for the common good. It worked for all of society. And concepts like thrift would have been absolutely a normal part of the vocabulary. Questions of fairness in terms of wages and things of that nature would have been normal. And it wouldn't have digressed to the point where it is today, where really the only driver, if you will, is to make as much money as possible. And we know that that will lead to behavior that is not conducive to good political economy. I also look at the economic ethic that was observed by Max Weber, the so-called Protestant work ethic. And that era also was undergirded by a very strong, almost puritanical form of Calvinist ethic that believed that hard work, free market, conscience working together, thrift, would produce an economic system that worked for everybody. But unfortunately, as I'm sure you know, Stacey, we live in a culture which is postmodern. And the capitalism we have is therefore postmodern. So in many ways, it's devoid of a moral compass, and it's resistant, if not impervious, to ethical constraint. So we need to find a way to bring ethics back into capitalism so that we aren't tempted to try to replace it with some kind of utopian economic system which is doomed to fail.
Okay, so can you talk about how Christians can impact that? Because there's obviously Christians are in the marketplace, Christians are in business, owning businesses, working for others, et cetera, and we have the opportunity to impact the way capitalism is executed for good. How do we do that?
Well, that is a great question. In the book, in the last two chapters, I talk about redeeming capitalism from the bottom up and redeeming capitalism from the top down. And most of us don't have the influence to redeem it from the top down, but it's an important narrative that we need to start. But we can all redeem it from the bottom up just in terms of how we view things like the nature of work and things like virtue, and why even in a pluralistic society, Christians can be shining examples of virtue in the workplace. If we do as the apostle taught us, to treat our work as our worship, that's going to get people's attention. People are going to look at work as something much more important, much more fulfilling, much more life-enhancing than just a means to a paycheck. And I believe that what the Bible clearly teaches us is that the purpose of any economic system is not just individual enrichment, it's human flourishing. So it starts with our theology of work. It also comes down to how we view our relationship with each other. How do people who are in positions of authority at work view their employees, and how do employees view their fellow workers and their superiors? And I think, unfortunately, it's become very transactional, very contractual, and the biblical model is one of mutuality, it's one of covenant, it's mutual interdependence, and it's relational. So those are the kinds of things that we as Christians can do to start a long process of bringing virtue back into economics and into capitalism.
Wow. So I know that God has a plan for everything that we do. He has a plan for every aspect of our lives. We often don't plug into his plan. We try our own way. We try different ways of kind of fixing things, if you will. But God has a plan for our execution of capitalism. And there's a specific way that we can go about it. And you kind of touched on it a little bit when you talked about a work ethic and being honorable in your work and doing it for the glory of God, working for God instead of seeing, your boss as your ultimate employer. And those are important concepts. But even in a postmodern society, we can execute God's plan for capitalism. What is that?
Well, as I said, I think the first and foremost principle is that we see our economic system as the purpose of it is to, first of all, reflect the glory and the beauty of God in his creation. The imago Dei, as it's called theologically, the image of God which is in all of us. That's where human flourishing comes through. But also in the missio Dei, the mission of God, the mission of the church, which is to bring redemption, to help us overcome the effects of sin. That's all redemption means, is that we overcome the effects of sin. So how we treat each other, how we communicate with each other. You were talking about the political discourse. The political discourse in this country is a very serious concern to me because it seems as though we can't have civil conversations with each other without resorting to tribalism and screaming at each other and not appealing to the humanity in each of us. So it's the same in economics. This notion that somehow if everyone only looks after themselves, everyone will benefit. Ethical egoism, it's called. It's just not a Christian concept. A Christian concept for how we should conduct ourselves in business and at work is frankly that we love each other. And I tell people that the three virtues missing most from our economic system today are the virtues of faith, hope, and love. We've lost faith in God. We've lost faith in our institutions, even capitalism we've lost faith in. We've lost faith in each other. We've lost faith in the American dream. We need to bring faith back because faith breeds hope. And when people have hope, then they're willing to put in the hours and do the things necessary to help with human flourishing. But it all starts with loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. That's the bottom line. And it has to happen in economics as well as any other sphere of life.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put the link to the Amazon page for the book into the streams for everyone who's paying attention on the different live streams on YouTube and Facebook, etc. And I encourage you, if you're listening terrestrially, please check out one of those streams on the Facebook page, perhaps, and you can click the link through and go over and check out the book. The title of the book is Redeeming Capitalism. Dr. Kenneth Barnes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacy. God bless.
God bless. Great to speak with you. So it's an interesting perspective. He's not saying that, God's a, big cheerleader of capitalism, but out of all the systems that we have by which to do business with one another and to have a society, we're really doing pretty good with the capitalism. And so when we see corruption and we see things being done selfishly that do not work, it is incumbent upon us to find ways that we can glorify God and we can do things the right way. And then we can still have capitalism work well for us as a society. And so I think that's fantastic. If you want to call in and join the show, I'd love to speak with you. 866-963-2037. We have a few more things to get to. I want to give you a little bit of a preview for tomorrow. We have Carmine Sabia Jr. He is a Christian conservative political pundit, radio host, and editor. He's going to join the program tomorrow. And then the day after, we have Pastor John Hagee, senior pastor of Cornerstone Church, CEO of John Hagee Ministries, chairman of Christians United for Israel, Kufi. He's going to join the program. And then on Friday, we have surprise guest. So we don't know who you're going to, we're not telling you. It's not that we don't know. We're not telling you who it is. So you'll get to find out. Maybe I'll tell you on Thursday about that one. So now is the time where I'm going to tell you guys about this. It's outside. It's in our yard. It's a huge patch. It's like maybe 18 inches by 24 inches of mushrooms. But from my kitchen window, I couldn't tell what it was because it's about 200 feet away from our kitchen window. And so I thought it was a deer. You know how when the deers are babies, they lie down kind of in a circle in a depression in your yard, and the mom leaves them there, and they basically sleep all day, they sleep all night, and the mom just comes over and nurses them, and then they stay there. They're basically hidden in plain view. We found a deer like that before, and so I thought that's what it was, but I thought it was kind of odd because I could see it from the window, and usually you can't see it from a distance because they're hidden. Well, in this case, I kind of felt like because it hadn't moved, I saw it there the second day, and I didn't feel like I wanted to go out there and see what it was because what if it was dead? You know, because we've had that happen where another wild animal has killed a deer on our property, and we've had to call the town to come out, and they send out people to come and get the carcass. So I didn't want to go out there and be face-to-face with an animal that had been, you know, had met an untimely death. So I told my husband about it. I said, hey, there's an animal by the stump in our yard, and it's kind of far off, but I can see it from here, and it's big. And, you know, at that point, I didn't have an idea of how many inches, but I kind of was guesstimating. I was like, it's good size. I think it's a dead deer. So my husband, of course, he immediately, you know, goes right out there. He takes a look. He comes back in. He's like, it's not a deer. It's a patch of mushrooms. And as soon as he said it, something like, I don't know what it was, but it rose up within me and I got grossed out. Now, I like mushrooms. I like to cook them. I like to eat them. But this grossed me out because it was so big. And so then he started describing it like, he said, it looks like the back of a dinosaur, but it's mushrooms. And it's, you know, it's like a lot of them. It's more than one mushroom, but it's a big mushroom plant, and it's growing, and it's getting, and it's out there. And so then after he told me what it was, and I felt that kind of revulsion, and I really didn't know why I felt revolted, but I was just like, this is so gross. Then every time I go over to the kitchen sink to wash dishes or to put my plate, you know, in the dishwasher, I glance out there and I see it, and it would make me feel like, you know, like I was choking, like I was just so grossed out by it. So today, he said he went back out there, and it was bigger than before. He said it's like 18 inches by 24 inches, and it looks like it's growing pretty fast. I'm like, I'm so grossed out by this. So I actually told him, I know this is irrational, it's completely ridiculous, but I actually feel like I can't go out there and take a look at it. And I don't have phobias. I'm not unnaturally afraid of heights or small places or big places. I don't have any of that stuff going on, but this patch of mushrooms has actually grossed me out to the point where I can't go out there and look at it. So just a little while ago, before the show started, my husband sent me a text message. He's like, look out the window. And I looked out there and it was gone. He went out there and hacked it up like with something and removed it so I can't see it from the window anymore. That's marriage, you guys. That's love. When you have an irrational fear of a patch of mushrooms and it's grossing you out and you're kind of gagging every time you look out the window, and your husband goes out and removes it because he thinks you're crazy, but he just wants to help you out. So that just happened. Anyway, when we get back, we're going to talk about the suspension of a staffer for a Democrat. The staffer called out a horrible expletive to President Trump on Capitol Hill, and they have responded by revoking her access to Capitol Hill and suspending her for 2 weeks. We'll talk about that, and we'll take your calls, 866-963-2037.
This is Uncommon Moments. Here's former Super Bowl winning NFL coach Tony Dungy and his wife Lauren sharing from their book Uncommon Marriage.
In the mid-1990s, I started doubting that I'd ever get a head coaching position. Minnesota Vikings chaplain Tom Lamphere counseled me just to keep my eyes on Christ and be the best assistant coach I could. He told me to follow the Lord's guidance.
As Tony went into the 1995 season, he tried not to focus on his disappointment over 2 head coaching opportunities he didn't get. Instead, he got back to work with the goal of helping his team get to the Super Bowl.
Letdowns like these are why God gives us good wives. I needed Lauren to tell me that she loved me and believed in me no matter what. Try to encourage your spouse today.
Tony and Lauren Dungy, authors of Uncommon Marriage, learning about lasting love and overcoming life's obstacles together. Discover more at CoachDungy.com.
My name's Shane. Abusing alcohol and drugs made me so hopeless I wanted to end my life. Thankfully, Teen Challenge showed me how to start my life all over again without drugs.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless His truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Life is never picture perfect. Human beings come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities. No matter how much we plan, no matter how much we think we're prepared, the unplanned happens all the time. It's how we respond to the unexpected that shows our true humanity. But many do not see the value of every human life. Too many are willing to discard those who don't fit the picture of perfection. Abortion destroys the chance to love and to be loved. We never know what will fill the frames of our lives, or how empty those frames can be when we allow exceptions.
Every life is a gift.
Learn more at www.radiance.life.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
WMUR has confirmed that an intern for Senator Maggie Hassan's office shouted an expletive at President Trump as he arrived at the U.S. Capitol last week. He was meeting with Republican lawmakers on the immigration issue. A spokesman for Senator Hassan tells WMUR intern Caitlin Marriott has been suspended for a week. Her congressional intern ID badge has also been revoked, which restricts her access to the Capitol. The spokesman called it a breach of office policies regarding respectful and appropriate conduct.
So most of the people who heard her make that comment, you kind of fall into two categories. You're either really repulsed by the comment that she made, or you feel like, you know what, this is what should be done. We should definitely be doing these kinds of things and saying these kinds of things. And I think that it's absolutely ludicrous that she felt empowered to do that. And I think it's good that Maggie Hassan's office has distanced themselves from that kind of behavior. Remember, if it's good to yell that at Donald Trump, then it might be good to yell that at Maggie Hassan. And she has to be thinking, this is not the kind of language and the kind of behavior that I want from my interns and my staffers. And so it, you know, we've got to have some standards. We have to have some standards. Got to have them. Got to. So I'm going to go to the Facebook live stream because there's some really important advice that's being shared there, which is Daryl says the mushroom patch has to be sprayed to stop it from coming back. Oh my gosh. I am so grossed out right now. What is going on that I can't stand the idea of this mushroom patch that's out there? My husband said it doesn't look like mushrooms that we would eat. But it's huge. It's enormous, I'm telling you. And so he cut it down and then it's back. So I encourage you guys to go over to NRATV.com and check out, after the show, check out my hit on Grant Stinchfield this morning. We were talking about Maxine Waters and the fact that, so Representative Biggs, and I kept this for the show because I thought this was really interesting. This was one of the breaking news stories on the Daily Caller this morning. It's Arizona Representative Andy Biggs. He has 5 co-sponsors, and he's presented a bill to censure Maxine Waters for her comments, and then to demand her retirement, that she resign from her seat. She says that God is on the side of people who run those individuals who work in the Trump administration out of the public eye. In other words, if you're running people out of the public, if you see someone who works in Trump administration or is a Trump supporter, someone with a Trump bumper sticker, and you harass them and you mob them down and they get in their car and they drive away before they can get gas, or if they leave the restaurant before they can eat, or if they're forced out of the movie theater and chased down the street like Pam Biondi, or if they're harassed and harangued and forced to go home without eating dinner the way Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her husband were, then God is on your side. That is not true. Psalm 11:5 says God is on the side. Actually, let me read to you directly. I had this morning and I was just like, you can't say that, Maxine Waters. You cannot say that God is on the side of people who are doing violence. Psalm 11:5 says, the Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. So if you love violence, if you love doing verbal violence to people or physical violence, or if you are the kind of person who you want to make a point to someone like that in a violent manner, God hates that. It says the Lord hates that with a passion. So imagine passion in the form of a holy God hating something that we're engaging in. That's not going to be allowed to continue on for long. So don't be fooled by what the Democrats are peddling and what media types are peddling and what Maxine Waters is peddling. Anyone can take the word of God and twist it to suit their own aims. But if you are unsure about what they're saying, or if it doesn't sound right, or it's not passing the smell test for you, or if it looks like a huge patch of frightening mushrooms, go straight to the word of God and find out what it says. There are more verses that cover this subject, but specifically, I feel like Psalm 11:5 is the most perfect rebuttal to Maxine Waters' comment that God is on the side of people driving Trump officials from restaurants and public places. Psalm 11:5, the Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. All right, I'll take it. And this is all, it's on us. We control our own actions. We decide how we're going to behave. And so when we know we disagree with someone on something, sometimes that can be the roughest part. Do you see what I'm saying? You may love someone, I mean, you just love them dearly, but you know you disagree on a certain point. And at that moment, and every time you encounter that person, you have to make a decision if your love for that person supersedes the views that you do not share. And if you decide, I just can't spend time around this person anymore because I know what their views are, that's a personal decision that you're making. But remember where that puts the love for that person on the scale of importance. That means their political views are more important to you than their personality, than who they are as a person. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's the saddest part about doing this job is that because I'm doing this job, it means certain people feel like there's just no room for any friendship that's not, you have to be basically same political views as myself. We can't be friends. And that's not true. That is not true. But it also indicates that the friendship was below those political beliefs in the first place. The only reason the friendship was allowed to flourish is because the knowledge of what the views were, there was no knowledge. They either didn't know or they hadn't been informed or it hadn't come up, and so it was no big deal. But now that the views are known, supersedes. And it's not just with friends, it's with family also. So that's the saddest part about doing this job. It's rewarding. I'm not changing anything. I'm not complaining, but it is a part of what goes on. And we're seeing that, the parting of the ways where people have been unfriending each other on Facebook for at least as long as Facebook has existed. But more recently, it's become much more pronounced where people are gleaning out anyone who disagrees with them on any major subjects. You just can't be friends with them on Facebook anymore, which translates into real life, actually. People that would be fine with getting together and doing this and that, spending time together. Now, all the discussions are political. Now it's, you can't go anywhere without people talking about politics. It used to be in the grocery store, you don't dare discuss politics. You would be discussing weather, quality of the produce on offer, prices, how slow or fast the cashier is, how long you've been shopping at that location, any kids that you had with you, their ages, sports they play, etc. There was just so much small talk to engage in. Now, There's just, well, Donald Trump is Hitler. And I've been in line before and heard people talking like that. Well, you know, that's just the thing. I can't stand those Trump supporters. And I was at the airport and a lady was having that conversation. And I just turned around and looked at her, and she looked at me and gave a nod like, I know you understand what I'm coming from. And I just turned around. I thought, ooh, thank God I have some coffee here, and I am totally not getting involved in that conversation. Which also, I don't know if you guys saw the big story. They had a flight to Minneapolis where someone had it was a Spirit Airlines flight. You can find it on Drudge. It's a story on Drudge today. There was someone on the plane who had a medical emergency, and they had to divert from Minneapolis to another airport. And when they landed, I guess, combat veteran who's a woman completely went berserk and had a PTSD episode and had to be removed from the plane. And that video went viral. And then some other couple, the wife or the husband, got angry at what was being said about the person who had the PTSD episode, and they had to be removed from the plane. Emotions are running really high, and it's kind of crazy to watch. Oh, yay. Let's talk to a caller. We have Michael from Texas. Thanks for calling into the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. What's your comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, yes. I was just trying to get your stance on the actual presidency at hand, because I don't know where you stand on the actual presidency. Like, do you think he's doing good or doing bad? Because, I mean, I only can speak on other people's opinions because I'm not really too involved in it. But a lot of people have been saying, hey, man, you should listen, you should go, because honestly, I don't get into politics as much, because I come from a background of families who came to this country legally and busted their butt to become U.S. citizens, and I'm a product of a father who's from Pakistan, which is part of the worst countries you could ever live in. And keep in mind, now, that country is pretty bad to live in when it comes down to women's rights, gays, etc. And everyone's saying that, oh, yeah, you know, Trump's this, Trump's that. And I'm like, okay, well, what about the other people who work and who don't get into politics, who just try to strive to stay away from that? And people say, oh, yeah, but you're already in politics. How? Oh, you work, you get taxed. And, well, that's life, man. I mean, if he's the president, he's the president. So my question is to you is that what is your stance on the actual president at hand? Like, do you think he's going to win in 2020, or he's just, you know, getting lucky as he goes?
Okay. Thank you so much for calling, and congratulations on that's a good question. You've leveled a really good question. So how do I feel like the president is doing? Well, I have been pretty open in my opposition to some of the modes of communication of President Trump. He has, on more than one occasion, I felt like he's too blunt for his own good, and it really works against him. Not that what he said is, you know, it's just so crazy. It's not the way I would put it, and it's not typical for a politician, which he isn't, and it really gives ammunition to his detractors. That being said, the tax reform bill, the reduction in regulation, 22 regulations reduced for every one new regulation that was implemented, his revamping of the Environmental Protection Agency's actions across the country, and the Department of the Interior, and all of the agencies that take care of our federal lands, and specifically his work on reducing illegal immigration. I feel like those are huge wins for the administration. And I also think he's gone above and beyond to demonstrate how much he wants to help every community. And that is seen across the country, just an amazing economy we're experiencing, and a boom in business activity that is unprecedented. And really, that's a benefit to Americans, because you don't have to support Donald Trump. You don't even have to support conservative ideals or the Republican Party platform to benefit from a president who wants to reduce regulations and reduce business tax that unleashes the economy and results in more jobs than there are people who are looking. So to me, I think he's doing a good job. As far as 2020 is concerned, if he's not able to get Congress to come on board with him to do something about the Affordable Care Act and the immigration crisis at the southern border, he is going to have trouble getting reelected in 2020. Not because Trump supporters won't turn out for him, but because he needs some independents who feel compelled to vote for him because he's delivered on promises. And he has. He said he would bring back steel jobs. He said he would bring back manufacturing jobs. These are jobs that President Obama said could not be brought back. They are coming back right here on American soil, and it's good news for American workers and for small towns that were completely destroyed by these companies leaving and offshoring. So I think he's satisfied a lot of the initial, hey, what can he do in the first year and a half, et cetera. He has a long way to go, and he's fighting an uphill battle. I much rather see a second term for President Trump than any Democrat because he's pro-life and he's for securing the border, and those are my top two issues. Top two. The second is tied with, obviously, the Second Amendment. I'm a Second Amendment supporter, and I really believe that Donald Trump has those three. There's no space between us on those three issues. On other things, some of the dealings on the tariffs, I know what he's going for. I'm hoping that it's going to work out well, and it doesn't undermine the progress that's been made on the business side with the business tax reduction. And I think the personal side for individuals, the tax reduction was not nearly enough. I could barely call that a nibble for what was reduced, but the business side has kind of made up for that. So I would say it's largely been successful, but it's just really tough because he doesn't have the party support that he would if he were a traditional candidate, which isn't saying much because a traditional candidate on the Republican side, such as a John McCain, a Mitt Romney, a Jeb Bush, wouldn't even be trying to do any of this stuff, wouldn't have gotten the tax reform done, wouldn't have reduced regulations, wouldn't be working so hard at securing the border. And so they would have the support of the party, but nothing much would be getting done. So we've been there. We've done that. We've tried that. We have the T-shirt, and we've burned our T-shirts, and we're ready to have something different. And that's what we have with Donald Trump. So I think it's pretty successful. We just have to keep praying for him, as I did President Obama. Got to keep praying for those who are placed in authority over you, because the Bible says that God turns the head of your leader whithersoever way he would have it to go. I'd rather God be the one directing Donald Trump's path. That's my hope and my prayer. So, great show today. Thank you guys for being here, and I'll be back with you tomorrow. Hopefully it'll be a sunny day and the mushroom patch will not be back. Pray for me, y'all. This is my first ever experience with this, and it's crazy pants. All right. Be blessed. Talk to you tomorrow.